So let's start on the DXY on the weekly time frame. We had this bearish inside candle last week, which then means automatically we were range bound last week, and price leaves us here a bit in neutral territory. We did have the US government shutdown, and we obviously did not get NFP data, so we are lacking a potential catalyst in US dollar related pairs. We can see here we had an initial reaction here from one of these areas of interest to the left, and then entered immediately a more corrective phase. So this corrective price action could either be the start of a middle section for a larger bearish continuation, or just more volume accumulation here for the next move then to the upside. So we have to be careful. And we are forecasting both scenarios. And with all this, we have quite a lot of dollar related pairs, which give us opportunities for longs and shorts. So we are moving to Euro US dollar, and you can see here as well, price was range bound here last week. We had a very nice initial impulsive reaction from this area of interest here to the left, and then entered this corrective price action. So I'm not really interested in trading Euro US dollar next week, because of the overall sequence seems slightly off. It's not really obvious natural progression, and therefore I'm waiting for price to give me clear signals. So this overall could be a potential larger middle section, more corrective price action for then a way bigger, more complex structure for the next leg to the downside. So however, I'm looking at two potential scenarios in the early next week. Either we break to the upside followed by a lower time frame continuation to the upside, or the same goes for a break to the downside. And if we then get lower time frame continuation patterns, I would entertain, if it's very, very clearly structured, I would entertain a trade. Because we have enough rooms here to manage them to the next more obvious areas of interest to the upside as well as to the downside. However, there are better pairs on watch for next week. Australian dollar, US dollar, there was a trade here for me, another break even last week. We start here on the 1 hour time frame, and we can see here we had an initial reaction from this area of interest to the left, a nice impulsive move to the upside. We still have a gap here to the low, and this is a classic V-shaped recovery, but then we did not get an expected progression here in terms of like a V-shaped recovery. We would expect an initial impulsive move to the downside followed by continuation for a classic V-shaped play. Instead, we got this more corrective and more complex price action, which then formed a bullish continuation structure here with a 1, 2, 3 into this low here with a very nice 1 hour candlestick reversal pattern with a structured middle section. So that was enough for me to look for the long entry, which I then got taken out for a break even. So overall, this structure for me looks still more bullish. And I'm now waiting for price to break above this whole area here, followed by a lower time frame continuation to enter the next long. I would entertain the whole thing slightly below. So if we just get a smaller impulsive move on the 1 hour, followed by a structure into London session early next week, I would entertain a long on the lower time frame, even slightly earlier. US dollar Canadian on the 4 hour time frame, we can see here we still have this obvious area of interest where price tends to gravitate to, and we have here a nice area of interest or a small liquidity point here to the left, a gap, and ideally we see a structured approach into this area to then enter a long here. However, if we see a bit more momentum, or the momentum basically keeps strong long, I would entertain a long in this area here already, because we have here a potential base and then a potential, let me clean that up to make it a bit more clear. However, yeah, if we see something like that on Monday, I would entertain that for a potential long, because it's enough room to manage the trade into this the previous discussed area of interest to the left. And even though if we get then a structured reversal it's still enough room to warrant a long. And if it's the trade that goes and breaks through, perfect, then we are already in. US dollar Swiss francs was another break-even trade for me last week. We had that on watch before. We have this initial impulsive move, a correction, the next impulsive move, and we were waiting for the next correction here for a long continuation. We did get that initially slightly steep here with this 1 hour entry candle. And now we can see here price overall, the idea is still sound. So I'm still leaning towards a long. We have here a 1, a 2, and we have a liquidity area, which a nice start of a middle section. And if we see price finishing this structured approach into this liquidity area, I would entertain a long. It is slightly out of proportion overall, but considering it's a Swiss francs pair, they tend to follow structure fairly well, and very often they are a bit oversized. So therefore, a 4 hour entry here, I would still entertain as a long. US dollar yen. On the 4 hour time frame, I'm still leaning more towards a short. We do see that you could argue that price already retested this low here to the left. We have a fairly clear liquidity area here on this run to the downside, which is still then less than a 50% retracement. And we have here on the 1 hour time frame, we had a potential structure here, but this was a failed structure because of no structured middle section. It's more a double bottom for then the next leg to the upside. So this is clearly neutral price action right now. We have an area, or actually 2 areas, which make the next move fairly clear. So if we get a break below here and a lower time frame continuation pattern to the downside, I would entertain a short from this area. However, if we see corrective price action into this liquidity area here, followed then by a lower time frame continuation pattern, I would entertain a short here. Overall, this does not look for a long play. Australian dollar Canadian on the 4 hour time frame, another pair we were looking for a long continuation last week already. We have this fairly obvious liquidity area, this fairly obvious gap here, which price could close. So if we see price coming down here for this larger 1, 2, 3 continuation for the next bigger move to the upside, this would be ideal. So there would even be a potential for a short from here, a short into the long. However, right now on the lower time frame for early next week, we can see here we also have fairly obvious levels to consider. We have this potential first base for a structured two-touch continuation, which is just outside this overall a bit more complex price action to the left. So if we see a structured 1 hour flag into this low here, I would entertain a long already up here for the next leg to the upside. Euro New Zealand dollar, it's a bit more complex overall. I'm leaning a bit more towards a long. Another one we were discussing last week, because this is the start of this running channel, and we said we were looking for longs in this area. However, price took quite some time to just even approach this area, which then makes it a bit more neutral also with this more corrective price action. However, I'm still leaning a bit more towards a long continuation. And if we see a structured approach here, we have here a potential 1, 2, 3 forming a middle section. So if we get something like that, this would be a very nice 3-touch reversal on this low for a long continuation, a higher time frame continuation. However, on the other hand, if price just continues next week to tap this previous highs here to the left again without closing these gaps and then breaking back in, I would entertain a lower time frame short continuation in this area, but that has to be an insurance entry. Pound yen, on the other hand, here on the 4 hour time frame, we have some nice bullish momentum, and we are coming from an area of interest, closing these gaps here to the left, and I'm now looking for a long continuation at least into this liquidity area here, which is fairly obvious. And we can see here on the 15-minute here as well, we have this liquidity area here, which is just outside this whole. You could argue this is a failed bearish continuation structure to the downside. So and we have this liquidity area here on slightly higher up, so it would make sense for price to grab more volatility or more volume before we see the next move. And if we get a structured approach here on early Monday during Asia session into early London, that would be ideal for a long continuation, at least into these highs here, before we then might see a bigger reaction. Canadian dollar yen, I'm leaning more towards a short continuation here. We had this very nice impulsive run to the downside. We are now within this range here with a clear next target to the downside. And after this impulsive run, we were expecting a slightly larger correction before we see the next move. On the 1 hour time frame, it's not a nice structured flag. We do have here a potential 1, 2, 3 retesting these previous lows in form of a 1, 2, 3 as well. So if we get something like that, I would entertain a 4 hour reversal candlestick pattern as an entry. Or then a price breaking out, breaking back in, and an insurance entry on the lower time frame. And New Zealand dollar yen, it's more or less the same on the daily time frame. We can see it's not as nicely positioned for the short continuation as Canadian dollar yen, because we clearly tapped a significant value area here to the left, and we have now a nice daily follow-through candle. However, next week we are expecting a rate cut from the New Zealand in the New Zealand dollar, and therefore more weakness overall. Even though this could be a potential reversal in terms of price action, I'm still leaning a bit more towards a short continuation, which would also make sense. Slightly higher risk right now, because again, it's a unstructured flag into a liquidity area here with the potential 1, 2, 3. So I'd like to see a clear break outside, washing out these areas here, and then a break back in, followed by a lower time frame continuation to enter a short. So that's it. That's my watch list for next week. See you next week. Bye-bye.